Here we go again, another Pocket Color mod. Have you ever bought a Game Boy Color and it really is a non-working Game Boy Color that you can't do anything about? This one's perfect candidate for what we're about to do because everything's pretty destroyed, but the RAM and the CPU are still perfect. I've been trying to perfect a Pocket Color mod for a while, and I think this is my final attempt because I'm pretty happy with it. This is my Poco Plus and it has every mod I've ever really made on it, and the thing about it is all you need is to bring a CPU and the RAM. It's a little bit like Funny Playing's Game Boy Advance mod where you just need to solder the RAM and the CPU and you have a working Game Boy. The things that I've added to this mod are stereo speakers, RGB LEDs, a brand new power switch and power circuit, and also charging, my safer charger to be exact. The kit also comes with a cart slot that you solder separately. That's so you have more space to solder on the CPU. Now to take the CPU off, I am going to use a hot plate and I'm going to show you two tools that I use to help me along with this. One is this vacuum pen and the other is this little, I don't know what you call it, but people use it for BGA soldering a lot. So I'm going to use my Miniware hot plate MHP50 and we're first going to take off the RAM using the little flat thing. I don't know what it's called. Anyway, so you just slide it underneath the chip and you can see it's really easy just to pull it off. The next is the vacuum pen. While it's on the hot plate, I just have it on and just slightly pull, and then when it gets hot, you'll find the CPU will just come off easily. Now with the rest of the components, you can harvest the headphone jack, the cart slot, and especially the power switch because these will be useful if you do any other Game Boy modding. The Poco Plus comes with a few things. One is this jig that I have 3D printed and it lines up with the bottom of the shell and it shows you where you can file for the USB-C and also the second speaker holes for the stereo sound. Now I'm just going to use my Sharpie to mark where the USB-C is and also where the speaker holes are. You can sand or file with the jig on, but I just like to mark it with Sharpie so it helps to know what material needs to be filed away. For the files, I'm using Tamiya ones. I'll have all this information in my description, but I like these because they're good with gunpla, which means they're good with the plastic. Now for cutting USB-C ports, I recommend you take your time. You can always take off more, but you can't add more back. So take your time as much as you can and constantly put the board back in to see how it looks. For the speaker holes, I'm using a drill. I use a drill bit about 1mm or 1.5mm. Then to get rid of the burr, I just use a X-Acto knife and then one of my hand files that is a thin cylinder. To prepare for soldering the CPU, first try to line it up as best as you can. I usually use a microscope for this, but I'm just doing it by eye because I'm filming. So once you think you have it right, add a little bit of solder to hold it in place, but just only slightly. I'm using solder paste here just because it's solder and flux, so it just makes things a little bit easier when you're drag soldering. Be very patient with yourself during this. See that it doesn't match up on one side, so we're going to have to reheat that tiny little blob I did at the bottom and just push the CPU up a little bit more to try to get it in line. As always, be patient with yourself here. Only add a tiny bit of solder because it's easier to undo a little mistake than a big one, of course. So once you think you have it back in line, then you can just reheat that bit of solder and double check that all the pins are aligned. Okay, so I lost the footage of me drag soldering the CPU on, so I will show you me doing it with the RAM. So once again, we just need to align the pads. It's a little bit easier because it's only two sides with the RAM. So I'm just going to add a little bit of solder paste because once again it is solder and flux, and then I'm going to use a K-tip. I used my iron a little bit lower, it's 330 degrees Celsius, and I just use a little bit of flux and try to get out the bridges. I didn't do the cleanest drag solder job here, but hey, that's okay, we all have skill issues sometimes. Now that that's all soldered, I just have to clean up the flux, and I like to use my method of having some kitchen towel and just spraying some isopropyl alcohol and brushing it off with an anti-static brush. That's so when you're brushing, the flux actually goes onto the paper towel instead of just thinly being spread all over the board. Now that that's soldered, we have to do a sanity check, and that's when we plug in the screen to make sure we get the Game Boy logo with no weird color artifacts. So just plug in the screen and plug in the battery or a USB-C, and we have the logo. Everything looks great, so we can solder on the cart slot, and we can do this at hyperspeed because it is the easiest part of the entire project. Now we're going to solder on the speakers. Remember, you actually need 2 for this board, and I'm just using the funny playing ones because they're my favorite ones on the market. When you're soldering on the speakers, the board actually has markers for which side is negative and which side is positive for the speaker. Now that doesn't mean too much. All it means is you have to make sure the same side of the speaker that you solder to the positive is the same side on each. So for example, you can see on the picture I have drawn the plus and the negative. So on the left side, you have to make sure it's the same plus and negative, and on the other side, you have to make sure it's the same plus and negative. Otherwise, the audio will sound a little bit funny to your ear. Now we just have to put it all together. The Poco Plus comes with clear pads, just so you know, for the LEDs. Now the screen kit that I recommend is the Q5 OSD kit, which has a select A and B pin out, so we can solder those up to the pads on the top of the Poco Plus. Now you can solder whatever you want to the up and the down of the wheel that replaces the contrast wheel, and a lot of people like to solder the touch pads from the screen kit, so you can change the brightness using the thumb wheel. I'll have all this information linked in the description on the tutorial page. Now to install the battery, you just need to put it through the little hole and plug it in before you screw in the back. On first boot, you will need to change the position of the screen. I've already used this screen kit, so I didn't have to, but you just press select A and B at the same time, and then you can change all the settings that you want here, like the V position, which is vertical, H position for horizontal, also the brightness or the pixel effect. To change the LED color, you can hold down start A and B, and when the buttons flash, that means you are in the edit mode, and then you can change each section by using A for A and B, start for start and select, or up for the D-pad. You can then press B to change the brightness, and then leave it without pressing anything for about 3 seconds, and the settings will automatically save. And that's it, you've finished your Poco Plus mod. It's a pretty simple mod if you can solder the CPU and the RAM on easily. I spent a few years making a million different iterations of the Pocket Color mod, and I think this is the last one. I can't think of anything else I can add. So thank you for your support, and as always, have a nice day wherever you are in the world.